Hello, hello. Can you hear me out? Can anybody hear me? Give me thumbs up. Yes, yes, I can hear. Can you hear me now? You can. Brilliant. Right. Shall we begin? Good morning. And hello, and welcome to the 100 Years webinar, 100 Years War webinar. Do you know the 100 Years War lasted longer than 100 years, but for some reason they just call it the 100 Years War. I think it was 116 or something like that. Here we go. This is the admin that I have to do, otherwise my wife will beat me up. Here we go. Thanks for joining me. Hopefully you have found your way over to Zoom. How is the picture? Is the picture okay? Can you see and hear me okay? Let me know in the chat. Yeah, I can't actually read the chat because the chat is so small. Our Zoom webinar works similarly to Crowdcast. Don't be afraid to say hello in the chat section. But if you have any questions, please use the question button at the bottom of the screen and I'll go through these at the end. Now, there's no follow option here on Zoom, but if you would like to hear about upcoming webinars, click on the link in the chat panel to register to receive updates, because we have found a location where in a few weeks, we're going to go outside, shoot the bow, shoot the crossbows, all those kind of things, and include that properly in future presentations. Also, I would like to do something that I'm quite famous for around the world, is the Battle of Agincourt presentation, but we'll hold on for that because it's a biggie. But meanwhile, 100 Years War. Do you know, you have to go back. I'm going to take this off. Excuse my scruffy hair. Go back to a time 600-700 years ago. No electricity, no gas, no plastic, no rubber, no elastic, no cotton. Yeah. A time when running water was, well, you got it out of a bucket. There might be a pump if you're lucky. You took a bath not that often. Doctors were a bit weird. A time when you were ruled out both by a king and by the church. But let's go back 1346. We have a king, Edward III. Some regard him as the first true English king, but you've got to remember 1066, go back a little bit. England was invaded by the Normans, who really were French Vikings. They came over, captured England, defeated the Saxons, crushed England, spread into Wales, Scotland, Ireland. One thing they did, though, was they continued on the work of Alfred the Great. They united the country, made it one. You know, there will be rebellions, there will be fights in Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, and up in the north of England, but let's not worry about that. Edward III, he had pretty much a united country, but because of his ancestors, his relatives going back, he was part French. And through his mother, he was one of those in line for the French crown. But the French sidetracked it. They brought in a law, the Salic law, which says you can't inherit the crown of France through the female line. And it was kind of not nice. In fact, it was a ruse, a trick. And France itself wasn't a united country. France of then compared to now is totally different. There were lots of parts of France which belonged to the English through their inheritance of the Normans and through their different things. There were some parts of it which were totally independent. Brittany, Gascony, Burgundy, lots of places. So France was, a lot of it was in the north, over in the east. So it was a different country. And they upset Edward III. Edward III, great king. We're going to start speaking English, he said, instead of French, because all the nobility spoke French. And when he actually went to war against the French, there was a sea battle. Sluys, I can never pronounce it. But it wasn't like ships coming up with cannons and boom, boom, boom. The ships got together, tied together, and everybody fought as if they were on land. And it was a great English victory. But he landed in 1346, a massive invasion force, literally where the Americans landed in 1944 on the 6th of June, around by Omaha and that on the Caratan Peninsula there in Normandy. He landed there, and he started what's called a chevauchée, an expedition into enemy territory, and you burn and you destroy crops and all that to show that the enemy are incapable of actually fighting back. And it was a way of shaming the French. Hey, look, you know, their king, Philip VI, he wasn't the strongest of kings. In fact, a lot of people regard him as being pretty rubbish. He had lots of strong knights, yeah. Well, this is what happened. The English army, which also has Welsh in it, it also has French in it. The French army has the same kind of thing. It even has, I believe, some Germans in it. Gosh, this is a kind of a European. Normally in the books, you think it's just English and French, but it's not. All right, there's even Italians there, Italian crossbowmen, the Genoese. They're on the French side. So what happens is this, very simply. The English burn, the French follow. The English, though, start to run out of food, and the French army is getting stronger, stronger. The English army lost men, lost supplies, and they've got to get to the north of Normandy, up into Picardy, to meet an English fleet of ships that's going to bring supplies, arrows, men, food, that kind of thing. But the French are very clever. They've got the English army pinned against some rivers. They can't get across these rivers. They slip across the one, I think it was called the Aisne, and but then they're stopped by the great River Somme. Each time they march, they find the bridge is either down or it's blocked, and they're having real trouble because they're being driven by the French towards the sea. And this is where the story really begins, because the English are trapped. Because what's happened is the French are on one side of the river, but their army's big enough that they're also on the same side as the English army. And the English army's got its back to the river. They can't retreat. They've got a baggage train filled to the brim with ladies, boys and girls, all of the baggage, armor, arrows, what little food they have. But they're trapped by the River Somme. But they capture a local. And because there was lots of French was spoken in the English army, they ask him, how'd you get across the river? And he says, oh, over in the distance there is a ford. Now, a ford is when for instance, in this case, when the tide goes out, it reveals the bed of the river and it's solid. It means you can get across it. And the French used it to drive their cattle across. So the king sent forward some scouts, and with the Earl of Northampton and Warwick and all of these top guys, they saw cows as if they were walking on the water, but what in fact it was, there was only a few inches of water. The tide was out. So they signal with their horns, you know, there's a crossing. So the army now, they get to Blanchotec, it's called, and they're going to get across the river. But halfway across, crossbow bolts come flying across. We've got a crossbow bolt here. Yeah. I just had it in my hand. There you go. This is a crossbow bolt shot from a crossbow. This is quite a long one, but as you can see by the chiseled head, that smash into you, it's going to hurt. It'll go through pretty much a lot of armor. I'll show you a crossbow. So this is your crossbow. And to load it, you have to span it. Hold on. Some you could just put a hook on your belt and you could hook it up. Some you could do with a big windlass and things, you know, a winding. Or this one, I think I've shown some of you this before. You put a goat's foot lever on and then you load it by pulling it back and then you can shoot it. You got to take this off. So the crossbow, it takes a while to shoot it. You've got to load, aim, and they can break down and that kind of stuff. So the English bowmen that are there, they can shoot their arrows. Have a look at these for tips. About 125 miles an hour. These are called bodkins. This one's about 600 years old. So we know exactly what they look like because we have them. I'll try and hold that a bit steady. There's a few others here. How about these nasties? Broadheads. Now this one, it'll hurt the horses. If this one goes through you, you're in trouble because you can't pull it out because of the spikes. You see the other end? These are goose feathers, glued and tied on. Yeah. So, Manchetek, crossbowmen from the French side are shooting down. English bowmen are shooting back. Knights charge into the water. Bosh! There's a bit of a battle, but the French are pushed back because the English are coming online. More and more men. They're getting across. They're pushing the French. The bowmen now, those that have survived the initial little attack, are further in and shooting. French withdraw. The whole of the French army, the whole of the English army get across the river just as the tide is coming back in. And the French army are right behind them, but they can't get across the river because the tide. So they've got to either wait for the tide to go out or wade their horses across, but the English are waiting. So they decide to go back, I think, to a place called Abbeville, and they come round the other side. Now, some of the books say the king was pushed, the king did this, the king did that. Well, I'll tell you, what Edward III did was he went to a place that he knew, a hill, Crecy. He knew the whole disposition of this battlefield. The hill went around. Now, I've been there, so I know exactly what it's like. He ordered his troops into their divisions, basically 3 big divisions, and he had the bowmen dig holes about a foot wide, square, foot deep. And then we think they piled earth or put the turf in front of it so you couldn't see the holes, because this battlefield was a long slope going down. And the English dug their holes because there were no French there. A few scouts came out having a look, but not the French army. The English had time. Now, the way they were deployed was kind of, I suppose you would call it a bow shaped, with bowmen on the edges like this. Now, the Prince of Wales, the king's son, he was only 16, if I remember correctly, but he is leading his Prince of Wales division. He, of course, had people backing him, you know, the noblemen were there. And the stage is set. The bowmen are ready. If I remember correctly, there's 3 million arrows in the baggage train. So they're well provisioned with arrows. However, they're not well provisioned with food. They've got to fight the battle, move on, fight the battle and win, take the French supplies. Well, the French arrive. It's a rainy kind of a season, August. The bottom of the field, the French come in, massive, massive army. And the English, kind of looking down the hill, can see this whole thing happening. So the women and children are sent back to the baggage train. Their job, feed the arrows to the bowmen. The English fight on foot. Their horses are taken to the rear. Yeah. So the stage is set, but it's late afternoon. About 4:30 when the French do the most amazing thing. They should have waited, but they didn't. Some say it was the King of France who was making the wrong decisions. Some say it was his knights who were eager. but they decided to send their Genoese crossbowmen forward. Now, these guys were very disciplined. It was a professional force, but each crossbowman relied upon another soldier called a pavisseur. He carried a great big shield, bigger than a Roman shield. And his job was to go with the crossbowman, set the shield up, and then he put his spear there. And the crossbowman could reload behind this shield. And if you put 2 or 3 of these pavisses together, you had what they called a mantlet, a little defensive position. They could reload, shoot, reload. And they say that 3 crossbowmen could use 1 pavisse just by rotating. But all the pavisses were way back at the wrong end of the army. So this fantastic force of Genoese crossbowmen are sent forward, and it rains, pours it down with rain. Their crossbows are soaking wet. Now, we don't know for sure if that will stretch the crossbow strings because they would have been heavily waxed. But the legend is, as they marched forward, they stopped, formed their lines, moved forward, stopped, formed their lines. They have men with spears with them, these pavisseurs, without their shield. They also have cavalry, guys on their horses, so I understand. And then on their 3rd stop, boom, they shoot. But for some reason, they got the range wrong, whether their crossbow strings had stretched, whether they just miscalculated. But the English bowmen on the top of the hill, they were ready. They'd been told, hold fast, hold fast. That means don't shoot. And they were, now I'm a bowman, that's what I live for, you know. And they were just standing there waiting. And the bowmen are allowed to move forward, minding the holes, and then shooting downhill. 7,500 bowmen released their arrows. These crossbowmen without their shields, well, they've got some armor, but arrows will find a way. Men are spinning round, falling down. They try to shoot, but they haven't got the range. But the longbowmen shooting downhill can shoot their arrows up and drop them in amongst the crossbowmen, who begin to fall back. It must have been horrendous for them. Must have been terrible. Grimaldi, their leader, was actually wounded at this stage. And then, whether it's true or not, we don't know, their own cavalry, the French cavalry, moved forward, and they actually kill or ride down some of their own men, which was silly because they're breaking up their own charge. They then charge up the hill, and it's a long way. And as they get to the top of the hill, the bowmen on the side now shoot into the side of the horses. The cavalry with their lances and their brave knights have not seen the holes. And as they charge straight towards the Prince of Wales, because they can see his flag on the left there as the French come up the hill, bang into the holes. Horses trip over. Don't forget, horses weigh well in excess of 1/2 ton. And with the armor and all of that, and the armored knight on the front, on their back, it must have been horrendous, crashing onto the ground. The bowmen shooting into the horses from the side into their flanks. Horses began to panic, turning, swaying. Some just sat down, and their riders couldn't do anything. And the English men-at-arms, the knights and that, just went forward, banged, then withdrew. The French commander, I've got his name written down here. Let me see if I can find it. Alençon, that's right. He led the first charge. He was killed. But in the next charge, there's something so brave and yet so sad. One of the commanders was the John of Luxembourg, and his war cry was Prague. So in modern day, they will be Czech, and they've charged forward. But John of Luxembourg's an old man, blind, pretty much, can't see. And he asked his men, and I've actually got what the legend says he asked. Let's see if I can read it. Excuse me, I've got to put my specs on for this. This is Kevin's attempt at a bit of French. Let's see if I can find it. I thought I'd marked it. Right, I'm on the wrong page. Here we go. I think I found it. Here we go. So before he charged, this old man has turned to his brothers and to his squires. Je vous requiert très spécialement que vous m'honnez avant que me puisse faire un coup d'épée. My French friend Pascal will be turning over. He will. I especially request you to place me so far forward that I am able to strike a blow against the accursed English, some people have asked. Well, he never got a chance. His horse was brought down. He was killed. After the battle, they send him back to Prague. He is wrapped up. Everybody with him was killed. But what happens now is the French charge 13 more times. Charge after charge. But of course, in front of the English positions, there are mounds of bodies, horses, men, yeah, all piling up. So as another charge hits it, bang, bang, it can't get through. And the bowmen all the time, it must have been, c'est terrible for the French. And we killed and killed. Let me show you. This is a weapon of a bowman. It's a simple knife, yeah? But if you look on the other end, there's a cap. This is what the bowmen used to hammer through the armor. Everybody had hammers, clubs, and of course, swords. This is actually a very good sword. It's steel. But if you've got a glove on it, you can bring it here and you can use it close in. Axes, lances cut down. And basically what happens is we annihilate the French. We slaughtered them. There were so many killed. I was reading this again and again. We will never know the truth of how many French were actually killed. Some say there was thousands upon thousands, 12,000. Some say there was 7,000. But we will never actually know. But some of the best of the French knights were actually killed. The French had put in the oriflamme, the red flag, which says no prisoners, kill everybody. But that had been lost in the battle. I was trying to find, there was a little piece that talked about what the battle itself was actually like from the French point of view, but I can't find it. I marked it, and typically me, I can't find it now, which is a shame, because it says how terrible the actual massacre was. But the French, it's interesting, attacked on the battlefield after the battle was over. Some people came online and there was another fight, but the French lost. And the French king was regarded as a softie, effeminate, silly. And this, going back to that 26th of August, 1346, is when something began between the French and the English. And it's unfair because the English regarded the French as no good in battle, yeah? And it's not true. They are a strong nation and their soldiers, just like anybody else, will fight, and fight they did. What happened at Crecy was they were misguided, misled. They should have waited till the next day, even starved out the English, but they didn't. The mistakes were made and it cost the French basically the flower of their nobility. But 10 years later, the English are still in France. There are still fights. And then we have, which really is one of the most important battles of the 100 Years' War. It's the Battle of Poitiers, 19th of September, 1356. Edward, Prince of Wales, now he's 10 years older. He earned the nickname the Black Prince. Some say it's because he had black armor, others because he was a real killer. He was a frightener. And he, leading his army from the south of France up, was doing the old chevauchée, going into the French countryside, burning and causing mayhem, looting, to show the French that their king could not control. John II, if I remember correctly, I've got it all written down here. It's terrible because this John II, he's all right. He is not a coward. He really does know what he's doing. And he leads an army to have a go back at the English. And his plan is very simple. He doesn't want to engage the English in a head-on battle. He doesn't want his men to fight on horseback, not complete. He wants his men to be disciplined, fight on foot in the English way, and watch. And they do the same as his father had done before him. They shadow the English along the rivers. And the Prince of Wales is in big trouble because he doesn't have enough ammunition. He has nowhere near the amount of food that he needs, and he ends up being trapped. But he chooses his ground well. Poitiers. It's on the top of a hill again. There are hedges, gaps in them. So they use their wagons to plug some of the gaps. But on the one side, there is a marsh, and you can't charge through it. You can't even march through it. So he gives himself a strong position, but he has no water on the hill. He has no food. His army is in dire straits, and yet in front of them, there is a French army, which is going to be well led. And it starts with a cavalry charge. Yeah. They try to go round to outflank part of the English. They're going to go onto the one side. Some of the famous earls here, you've got the Prince of Wales, you've got the Earl of Warwick, Salisbury and Suffolk. They're archers on both sides. They're men-at-arms behind the hedges, but they've also dug holes, little pits. So the English are ordered. You can't mount up on your horses. They've been put behind the wagons. And the French charge. The first attack is stopped by the arrows. But there's an interesting thing here. The French are using their horses to break the English line. They're not charging en masse. They're going straight. They're going to break the line. They have armor on the front of the horses, the chevron. And the archers, as they shoot at these charging horses, the arrows are bouncing off, go high up into the air and then drop amongst friend and foe. And they're failing. But then Warwick's bowmen are ordered out into the marsh a little bit because they can go from tuft to tuft. Yeah, so they don't sink to their knees. And they're shooting into the side, into the flanks of the horses. And the horses, doing what they do, go wild, go mad, sit down, rear up, charge back. We break the charge. Meanwhile, the French are coming up the hill. Their crossbowmen are supposedly to engage with the English. From what I can tell, it was ineffective because they stopped, they had their pavis, they shoot, the bowmen retaliate, but then the crossbowmen have to make holes in their ranks, in their lines, to allow the French men-at-arms, boom, boom, bumping all their armor, plodding up the hill. And the English simply let them come on and then shoot from the sides, rain arrows down. And when the French get closer and closer, there's something they didn't know. Growing off the ground about this tall were vines, spiky little vines and thorns, which will trip you over on a good day. They're still there to this day. Yeah. And all of a sudden their charge is broken up, but they can't get at the English because the English are behind some wagons, behind thorn bushes. There are a few gaps. So they push towards these gaps, and all the time the English are pouring the arrows in. The French king is watching, and he's trying to order his troops to go here and there. And his son, yeah, the Dauphin, he actually goes into the fight, and his unit gets right in towards the Prince of Wales, within striking distance of each other. But the English have got such a good position, and they know that if they don't win, they are all going to die. So they are fighting, hand to hand, holding the French, who've got to try and get through these little holes. And the Dauphin and his division simply are getting nowhere. They're just getting men killed at the front, the ones at the back are pushing, but so they order the withdrawal. And this is not a rout. They don't run. This is a withdrawal. And the king's sons, they come back down the hill, reform, and the king then does something. He orders the Dauphin out of the battle. He then leads a great charge up towards the enemy. But at the same time, a massive chunk of his army leaves the field. The Duke of Orleans, we're not sure if it's his, I think it was the king's brother. We're not sure if he did it on purpose. It was a mistake. But many of his men come and join the king's charge. And the king comes up the hill. And the English realize, oh, we need to do something. So they pulled a great trick. The Cap de Burr, an English captain there, gets loads of horses, crossbowmen, archers, whoever he can, to mount up, go out the back of the English position, come all the way round and charge the king's division from the back. Also, at the same time, mounted knights charge from the English position round another side and crash in. Archers are shooting. Men at the front are engaging the king's division. And we break it. It's the most incredible thing. The king's army is all of a sudden surrounded. There's nobody can come to their aid. And we are crushing it bit by bit. And it gets to the stage where the king himself, with his 14-year-old son, who became, I've got it here, 14-year-old Philip and the king were captured. But young Philip, he does something so brave. He is telling his father and the big knights around him, watch to your left, watch to your right, watch out. He became Philip the Bold because he was a brave man at this battle. But right next to the king is the oriflamme, the king's, the big red standard of France. If it falls, France is finished. Well, Geoffrey de Charny, who was holding it, he's downed. And soldiers now are shouting at the king of France, surrender, because his army's broken up into little bits and they are being surrounded and butchered. Bowmen are throwing down their bows because they've got no arrows. They'd even taken arrows from the dead waiting for the king's charge so they could reshoot them. This is an incredible story. And the king won't surrender until a nobleman comes forward. And it was a Frenchman who the king had actually expelled from France, and he surrenders to him. Then the English, gathering their prisoners, finishing off everybody else, thousands of people, attack the French army that's running away. And the French army tries to get into Poitiers town, but the people are terrified and lock the doors. And we butchered them. C'est terrible. But now the English, they have water, wine, food. The Prince of Wales, the Black Prince, they say that Battle of Poitiers was one of the most important battles of the 100 Years' War. But if you follow that 100 Years' War, at the very end, we lose. Poor leadership, poor supplies, and a new invention that had been used before, the gun. The English had used it at Crecy, but they were slow. Come the end of the 100 Years' War, bowmen against cannons, it's not going to work. But that's for another day. So, gosh, I've gone over time a little bit. I hope you're all okay. So, vous avez question pour moi? You got any questions for me? Yeah? So, let's have a see. I've told you two stories, Crecy, Poitiers, and the bowmen reigned a little bit supreme in each one. So, do you have questions for me? I think my wife is coming towards us so she can relay while we're talking. I haven't showed you my longbow, have I? Here it is, 7 foot long, Yeah. And this is my delight. It's my one thing, being able to shoot the longbow. I've shot since I was a little kid.
Okay.
Right, so what we got?
So first of all, we got Victoria Chadwick. How much of a difference did the hedges make?
The hedges in the Battle of Poitiers were everything. They were spiky, they were thick, so you couldn't jab a lance through them. So they were vital. And this is the thing about both Crecy and Poitiers, is they chose their position. The King Edward III, he knew Crecy, he knew the lie of the land. Yeah, so he chose it. But the Prince of Wales had to find a defensive position, Poitiers, which he did, and he did it well for sure.
Okay, Susie.
Susie?
Were there any other types of crossbows and arrows used?
We don't know exactly what crossbows they had, because nobody wrote it down. We can only assume that you had the ones where you had a hook in your belt and you could span it, or you had the ones that you pulled back. That's the best we can do. You have to go on what survived or what somebody wrote down, and nobody did.
Okay, Machine. How many men on average did each army have?
Right, Nasheen has asked how many men did each army have. We know at Crecy, 7,500 bowmen, 2,500, 3,000 men-at-arms and knights. So the English position, 10 to 12,000 men. And the French was about equal, because their army hadn't fully come online. At Poitiers, it was a smaller army, but the French outnumbered the English quite considerably. So you're talking of, tens of thousands of men, all told.
Okay, Susie. How long did each battle last?
The Battle of Crecy didn't last long at all, long enough for them to get up the hill and be smashed. It was 4 o'clock, 4:30 that they started, so you haven't got that much time. So 2 to 3 hours, finished. And Poitiers was over a little bit quicker, I think 2 hours.
Okay. Victoria is asking, how long was the 100 Years' War, if it wasn't 100 years?
I was just trying to remember earlier on. I think it's 116. So they just said it's 100 years. Yeah.
Okay. Did they use any tricks? This is from Susie. Did they use any tricks to trick the enemy?
Oh, tricks. Did they use tricks? Yeah, who was that?
Susie.
Susie. Oh, did they ever? One of the tricks they used in a later battle was, as the enemy were coming in on foot, marching up towards the English, and they then went, yeah, with their lances, the English stepped back 3 paces. Yeah. And that meant that the French fell over. That's at Agincourt. At Poitiers, the great trick was when they sent the Cap de Burg around with his little army on horses. It made the French think that they were being attacked by a massive English army on horseback. They weren't. There was less than 200 horses, and he was carrying the Cross of St. George flag, waving it around. And if the French had have turned on him, they'd have beat him. But it was a trick. Yeah. And also bringing them on, the trick of the holes in the ground and the little low spiked hedges and things like that at Poitiers were perfect.
Okay, thanks. Oh, here you go. Erin Vaughan is asking, how many arrows could the English longbow men fire in 1 minute? This is Erin.
Erin's asked, how many arrows could a bowman shoot in 1 minute? You said, Erin, fire. No, they didn't fire the arrows. You fire a gun, you shoot a bow. I can shoot comfortably under full pressure 15 arrows in a minute. My record is 24, I think, in a minute. But if you're in a battle, you've got to really pull that bow back. So one Frenchman recorded that for every 1 crossbow bolt shot, the English archer could shoot 4. And the consensus is about 15 in a minute. But you've got to remember, that's fine, providing you've got the arrows. Yeah, they say at Crecy there were 3 million arrows shot. We know that because They were in the baggage train. They've gone. That's an incredible rate of shot, but it breaks it down to about 7 arrows per minute from the bowman.
Okay. Good one. How did they make the arrows and crossbows?
Right, how did they, what's the name of that?
Gudrun Royer.
Gudrun Royer. How did they make the crossbows and the arrows? England had a full industry of arrow making, bow making. The man who made the bow was called a bowyer. The man who made the bowstring was called the string fellow. His wife and children would all be involved in this. The man who made the arrows was called the arrowsmith. Then the fletcher, the guy who did the feathers, and the armorers did the arrow point. The crossbows, Germany, Italy, they also had full industries for making these weapons. Some of the crossbows, though, became so fiercely expensive that only professional soldiers could afford them. Yeah, smaller crossbows, cheaper, of course, could be purchased.
Gudrun again asks, why didn't they put armor on the backs of the horses?
Right, Gudrun, you've asked, why didn't they put armor on the back of a horse? Have you ever ridden a horse? You get onto the saddle of a horse, the horse goes, yeah, the more you put on the horse, the slower it goes. The shorter distance you can actually attack. It's a balance. You have to balance what you put on your horse, what your horse can charge with. Yeah, and that's nature's fact about it.
Great. Sarah Pratt, this is. Sarah Pratt, sorry.
Hello, Sarah.
Apologies. Were the crossbows and arrows supplied by the king, or did the soldiers bring them, and who made them?
Right, the crossbowmen were a professional army, both at Crecy and those that were at Poitiers, and they would have bought their own equipment. One of the problems at the Battle of Crecy wasn't just the fact that their pavise, their shields were missing, their extra ammunition was missing too. And these crossbowmen were going into what they knew could be certain death. They haven't got enough ammunition. They haven't got their pavise. So it's crucial to have your ammunition with you. They would have brought it with them. And I know, because I shoot the crossbow, and I've learned in the past that what they used to do if they were in a castle, they would shoot crossbow bolts for practice. And those that just spun uselessly were actually put to one side to be re-looked at because they were bent or they were broken. They carried with them in their little quivers crossbow bolts that had been proven. They knew they were good. Yeah, and they were made either by themselves or by locals. Crossbow bolts are very simple to make, yeah, because they don't have to bend. An arrow has to flex. You see, it bends as it goes through the air. It does that. A crossbow bow doesn't do that. It's a solid piece. So it's easier to make crossbow bolts than it is arrows.
Okay, Victoria Chadwick, how many men in one army on average? I think we've kind of covered that, haven't we?
Yeah, we've covered that. You know,
Okay.
if you put like the King's army about 12,000 men, you're starting to get to the ballpark figure.
That was it, Crecy, wasn't it? Yeah. Okay, thanks. Done that one. We did that one. Evelyn, were there times when the enemy almost won?
This, you know, Evelyn, is the times when the enemy's almost won. The French actually won the 100 Years' War in the end. And there were skirmishes and there were sieges continuously throughout the 100 Years' War. And the French won many of them. What we're talking about is the thing that people dreaded. And that's when the two main armies come together. They did not want to fight the major battles because it cost so much life. And yet they were fought all the way through the 100 Years' War. And the loss of life was appalling.
Right. Team Bonds. Hello, Team Bonds again. Hi, glad you joined us.
Hello, Team Bond.
We didn't hear who won the battle. Could you tell us, please? So the Battle of Crecy, first of all.
Battle of Crecy, the English won an outstanding victory. I read around 80 dead English for 7,500 French. So, ouch. The Battle of Poitiers was different. We got lots of casualties. However, the English won, pursued the French army off the field and destroyed what was left of it. And of course, captured the king and his son.
Excellent, thank you. Oh, Leah, that's a name we've heard as well before.
Hello, Leah.
What helmets have you got in the background, and how how is your Titanic model going?
Well, first of all, my Titanic model is almost finished. Yeah, and we'll do a presentation on that. It's a shame I couldn't have got it for the anniversary, but it's difficult making these models. This is what's called a sallet, and it's probably 1450s and up. This is a visored sallet. At the end of the 100 Years' War, you would have seen these, and then later in England in the Wars of the Roses. Yeah, you can pull the visor down. You can have a bevel plate that comes up, but I'm not a knight. I am actually a bowman, and here is a kettle hat. A lot of people prefer these because you can see everything that's going, and you have the brim which protects. But before these, you had the heavy helmets, the real great helms, and that very difficult to actually breathe and see. Yeah.
What kind of time period was that one?
This one, they had these all through the 100 Years' War and then into the War of the Roses. This one is a War of the Roses style because the brim comes down, whereas in the 100 Years' War they were just straight. But your common bowman, he'd either have just an iron pot, an archer's cap like mine, yeah, a woolly cap. Some of them would have had nothing more than this, yeah, which is going to offer you nothing, but you can wipe the sweat from your brow. A leather cap, maybe, boiled leather cap. They look very romantic, don't they? Not. But armor was incredibly expensive. But I'll show you something that a bowman would have loved to have. That blade is hundreds of years old, and it's still sharp. Because this business, don't forget, is in the end of the day, you're going to be killing face to face. Ouch.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Helen Nichols asking who won the 100 Years' War. I think we did that one, didn't we?
Yeah, the French won it.
Okay,
yeah,
that's great.
Team bonds again.
Yeah, were there only crossbows or were they other types of bows? I think they may have got here late, but yes.
Yeah, we're talking about crossbows, longbows, but the fact is we don't know 100% whether the various bows that the French would have had. We do know at Poitiers, the English had some crossbowmen who advanced on horseback eventually. But for most part, the English were longbowmen. Yeah, and they did the great job because it was law in England. You had to practice. So from the age of 7, you would be practicing to shoot the longbow every Sunday, building the muscles. If you were any good, yeah, you would be sidetracked, put into an army, that kind of thing.
Okay, Evelyn's asking, she said, apologies if this sounds like her original question, but have there been times, or were there times when the enemy could have beaten the English?
There was Evelyn, is that
Evelyn,
Fletcher?
Fletcher, yes.
Fletcher. This is what your ancestors did. They fletched arrows. They were Fletchers. You might be related to my wife. Her family were Fletchers. There was a battle called Villeneuve, and it was the Duke of Bedford, Henry V's brother, who fought it 1420 something, if I remember correctly. And the English army was going to be finished. The French had learned about the arrows and says, right, you make sure that your cavalry are fully armored and give them a little bit of armor around the side. Charge down the bowmen first. And the Duke of Bedford said to the English, we're finished. We're not going to win this one. So every one of us is fighting for his own life. So fight like Englishmen. And so the French cavalry charged. The bowmen knew it was useless shooting at them. And this is what I love about the English. They lay down. The horses ran over the top of them. Okay, you're going to be bruised. A few of them are going to have broken bones. But those who were left then stood up and shot the horsemen in the back, who then galloped off. Yeah, they should have gone off the field, regrouped and come back, but they didn't. They galloped off. Meanwhile, the French army's coming on. The English are suddenly going, hey, we're in with a chance. 7,000 Frenchmen were slaughtered, driven into a river. They had the chance, the opportunity, but blew it.
One. Evelyn Fletcher again asking what would have happened if the enemy had won.
Well, with the enemy winning, England or the English would have been driven from France, which eventually happened. But as late as Henry VIII, the Tudors, we still had land in France. It's this heritage of the Normans and the English. But eventually the French will regain France, and over time it will become united. Yeah.
Good stuff. Okay. Any right, okay. So Evelyn was just commenting there. She says, any historian who knows what a Fletcher did in the past, who hears my last name, is just like, wow, an arrow maker.
Yeah.
That's a cool.
That's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So next one. Okay, Leah Pilmer. Near the end of the 100 Years' War, did it look like the French were going to win, or was it a surprise?
It was poor leadership on behalf of the English. The French knew that they couldn't beat us in big open battles, so they started to fortify and put cannons, guns, and bring modern technology. The English, unfortunately, were being poorly led. We had a king, Henry V's son, Richard, was it? And it was no good. I'd have to look that one up because he actually led to the Wars of the Roses. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that is a whole new chapter of hell for the English. Yeah. Well, that's it.
Okay. Why was it called the 100 Years' War, D. Stevens?
Because it lasted just over 100 years. It's easy, isn't it, in history to say, how long was the 116-year war? Oh, it was 100 years.
Okay, Leah is asking how many battles in total were there during 100 Years' War.
Do you know how many battles were there in the 100 Years' War? There were skirmishes, small battles, big battles, and there were sieges, and there were hundreds of them. It destroyed rural France. You know, the countryside of France was ruined by the 100 Years' War. And yet, do you know, right at the beginning, it could have been solved if the French would have listened, if the English would have listened, and if the church had kept its nose out, then things would have been different.
Okay, Leah is asking again, how many British were killed in the battle in the last story you told? You were talking about Villeneuve.
The Villeneuve. Do you know what? I don't know. The Battle of Villeneuve.
You did mention 7,000, but
yeah, that was a different one.
Oh, right, okay.
I actually don't know that much about Villeneuve, but if you want me to, if you put in the comments, in the future when I do Agincourt, I will put Villeneuve on the end of it because I've only done a little bit of research. Yeah. Oh, we got a long question.
Okay, so Evelyn just Googled and searched how long the war lasted. Okay, everybody will be able to read that in the comments. I'll leave it in the question.
How many does it say?
So it might more accurately, yes, be called the 116 Years' War. Yeah, that's right.
116.
Excellent. 16, yeah. Good, okay. So we've answered Leah there. Done. Gudrun's back again. Were there assistants to the English archers carrying extra arrows?
Yeah, Gudrun, that's a good question. With the assistants, it was their children. In the baggage train, you put your wagons in a circle, put the horses in the middle to protect them. And then your wives and your older children, you know, like your older daughters, will give the sheaves of arrows. I've got a sheaf of arrows here. Let me show you. The arrows come in bags, yeah, 24 in a sheath, and you simply give these to the children and they will go to your own division, your own company. They know where they are and they can tell who they are by the different flags and the coats of arms and things like that. So that's how it was done. The whole thing was a fantastic organization when you think about it.
Yes, okay. Leah Pilmer, why were there goose feathers at the end of the arrows?
Goose feathers, they are water birds, geese. So the feathers had to be long and they had to be waterproof. Simply that. Yeah. So waterproof, they could last longer. They're okay in the rain, or not too bad.
Good. Okay. Leah Pilmer, were those trains with the supplies real trains or something else?
Train is the old word for a long wagon train. Yeah, it's like the train. Yeah, like a bride who has a long veil that goes all the way down. It's a train, and wagon after wagon after wagon after wagon is a train. And then when you have a steam engine and you have carriages, it's a train.
Good. Okay. I think we've done that one.
Just to let you know, I've actually driven a steam train, a full-size loco.
Gudrun, were young men required to serve in the armies at this time, or was it optional?
No, that's a good question, Gudrun. You know, was it optional to serve? The English had a commission of array where if you were a knight, you had to supply X amount of men. I don't know if any of you were here for the feudal system, how it works. The knight supports the baron, blah, blah, blah. He supports the king. Each one has to bring certain amounts, and written in all of the counties throughout England, particularly in Wales, are the records of how many bowmen they sent, or how many bits of this and how many arrows. So if you look at Henry V, I think it was a third of all geese in England were slaughtered for their wing feathers. Bows were stored. It was this massive commission of array. And if you were told, you went. If you didn't.
Okay, good. Okay. Gudrun again is asking also, what happened to the king and his son? I don't know which king is.
Yeah, that's the king and his son. John and Philip, was it? They were ransomed. That's what you did. You captured somebody important, you held on to them, and then a ransom was paid. Yeah, and the ransom for the king was incredible. There were lots of arrangements and things were made, and marriages were arranged and things. But what happened while all this has been going on, just after the Battle of Crecy, the bubonic plague arrived in France, and it killed half the population of France. So by the time of the Battle of Poitiers, you're missing so many people. France is not as strong as it should be. Yeah, devastating.
How much?
Pandemic.
Sorry, Victoria Chadwick's asking, how much was the ransom? Do you have any?
Do you know what? I don't know. I was trying to remember, but because it's complicated, it's not just, if you give us 400 million, you can have the king back. There were other things as well. So the best thing you can do is look it up, because then you will read the whole thing.
Okay, thank you. Gudrun, what kind of metal was used to make armor?
Armor's made of steel. Cheap armor, iron. Chain mail. I've got a piece here I'll put aside for you. Iron rings. Yeah, knitted together. This is a coif for my throat. But your helmets could be simple iron cap, beaten, or if you can, steel. The best armor came from Germany, or mainly Italy. The Milanese armor manufacturing was fantastic. And much of the steel came from the same mines that the Romans were using in southern Germany, I believe, at Augsburg.
Okay. Leah is asking, how long did the holes take to dig?
If Leah's asked how long did the holes take to dig. I will tell you now, as an ex-soldier, if somebody says the enemy are over there, they're coming towards you, you need to dig a hole. You cannot imagine how fast you can dig a hole, right? But they didn't have very good shovels. They were wood with a piece of iron on the front, the graft. And but I guarantee those soldiers there with their wives and kids at Crecy, they would have dug their holes plenty fast, but they had plenty of time. Yeah.
Okay, we'll come back to Leah's question there in a minute. So what is the weight of a longbow and what sort of distances were they carried? It looks pretty awkward to carry. Well, this is from Elliot Wells.
Thanks, right, Elliot. The bows, it's a stick. So it weighs hardly anything, right? You de-string it, you put it in a bag and you put it over your shoulder, or you sling it over your shoulders. Many of the bowmen rode ponies, had horses, and you get used to your equipment. Yeah. The range of this in modern times, you go, how far can you shoot your bow? And what's the draw weight and what's the poundage? Go back in history. They didn't have the same weights as measures than us, and they didn't have the same distances. We know that at the Battle of Agincourt, the king advanced his army to within 200 paces of the French. So let's say a pace is roughly a yard. So that's 200 yards, yeah, which is under 200 meters, isn't it? Is a meter?
Yeah, a yard is just under a meter.
Yeah, so a yard is just under a meter. So 175 meters.
Maybe.
Because what you've got to do is, it's okay, I've shot 300 yards. What you've got to do, you've got to make sure that when the arrow arrives at the other end, it's going to put a person down, yeah, or it's going to sting a horse.
Okay. Gudrun, were the children at risk of being shot when delivering to the longbowmen?
Yeah, was that Gudrun?
Gudrun again, yeah.
Were the children at risk of being shot when they delivered the arrows to the bowmen? Yeah? You got a problem with that? You see, the thing is, in history, children weren't children. I was born just after the Second World War, and I was privileged. I was privileged to have a childhood. My childhood was structured. School, finish school, go to work. Yeah? Holidays. All of these things are new in history. Before the Second World War, people didn't go on holiday. They might have had one day off a year to go to the seaside. Kids didn't go to school. We're just looking at our family tree now around at the turn of the century. No school involved. Yeah. So children in the battlefield were just there. And at Agincourt, many of the children were actually killed. Yeah.
Okay.
I had my wife in the background there going.
No, there were schools.
What?
At the turn of the century, they did have some.
Oh, they did have school, yeah, but the populace did. We're having an argument now about schooling at the turn of the century.
Okay, Team Bonds. Why were there feathers on the arrows? So what did the fletchings do?
You know, I often get
arrows?
this, and if you shoot an arrow without fletchings, it's a stick, right? And it'll go and fall to the ground. Because it's got a heavy weight, it'll go dunk. But this actually keep it straight, and also the arrow rotates very gently as it goes through the air. So as it hits you, here's a little bit of gore for you now. Let's find this one. If that hits you, it doesn't go, ow, that hurts. It actually rotates as it goes into you. And they can't pull it out. They've got to push it all the way through your body.
It would leave a bigger wound, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah, terrible, terrible.
Yeah. Okay. Leah Pilmer is asking, how heavy was chainmail and did it work?
Do you know how heavy is chainmail? You cover yourself in chainmail, you got 20 odd pounds of weight on you. Is it effective? I shot an arrow in a film. In fact, it was this one, and the arrow hit the chainmail, broke it, and then pushed it all the way through the body of a pig. We were using meat, excuse me, and it came out the back with the chainmail hooked on here. So the chainmail had broken. There's a piece of chainmail. So as the arrow had hit it, it pushed the chainmail all the way through the body, including the padding underneath it. So this business of war, you know, what we do as human beings, is disgusting, isn't it?
Okay, so we're going to have one last thing.
One last question now.
Well, yeah. So Leah is asking, can you say a little bit about the last battle in the 100 Years' War?
No, because the English lost. Basically, the last battle. Gosh, I can't even remember the name of it now. Right, Leah, can you look up the name of the last battle for me? I forgot the name of it. But basically, English bowman was sent against a French castle, and he was full of cannons and guns. Cannons and guns, bows and arrows. It's not going to work. And there's an irony here. As late as 1815, the Battle of Waterloo, where the English and French and the Germans and Dutch and Belgians and a few others fought the terrible Battle of Waterloo. The Duke of Wellington, had tried to raise archers. He says, because against cavalry, against horses, the bowman in open battle is actually better than the musketeer. Wow. But this battle, my wife is now looking it up.
The Battle of Castillon.
Castillon.
1453.
1453. Guns versus bows and arrows. No. And also we were being poorly led, and it was going to break all the way down. What was the name of the English king at that time? Can you have a look for me, and we'll finish on this?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, because I've completely tried.
It says here the war ended in 1453 with a crushing victory of the French at the Battle of Castillon, in which nearly 300 cannons made by Jean Bureau.
300 cannons the French had at Castillon.
And they were used for the first time in battle. There's a piece in Wikipedia on that if they want to look it up.
And what can you remember the name? I can't remember the name of the king. Because he was so weak. Henry VI.
Don't tell that. I'm looking.
Henry VI, I think it was. I think the king who was the weak was the son of Henry V, and it all fell apart and led to us losing most of our things in France and the Wars of the Roses. So that's it now.
I hope everybody enjoyed that.
I hope you all enjoyed it. We've gone on for an hour and 10 minutes. Ooh. Would you believe? So if you've got anything you want me to have a look at, for instance, like the Titanic, I've got lots of Victorian stuff I could do, surgery. So Titanic, yeah. And
you're thinking about what's his name? Leonardo da Vinci.
Yeah, Leonardo da Vinci. I made some films for Oxford University Press about Leonardo da Vinci. So I know all of that, and I'll be willing to remake the models. So if you've got ideas, what you would like me to do, you let me know. Keep in touch, because I love doing this, and we'll crack on.
Hope you love watching.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Okay, let's finish this one up. Can you read those comments? I can't see.
No.
Just so you can see that. Okay.